The morning fog clung to the tarmac of O'Hare International Airport, wrapping the runway in a muted gray haze. Captain Maya Daniels, at 37 years old, strode through the terminal with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place in the sky. 15,000 flight hours, every continent except Antarctica, years of military service, and today her first official day as senior captain at Meridian Airlines. She checked her watch. 5:17 a.m. 13 minutes until the pre-flight briefing for Flight MA-27 to San Francisco. Enough time to grab a cup of coffee from the crew lounge before meeting her co-pilot. Maya adjusted the handle of her pilot's case and walked briskly through the terminal. The 4 gold stripes on each sleeve of her crisp navy uniform caught the fluorescent lights overhead. The sight of them should have filled her with pride, but an unshakable sense of unease lingered. Something about today felt different. Maybe it was just nerves. This wasn't just any new job. It was the culmination of years of relentless effort. The statistics alone told her how rare this opportunity was. Less than 1% of commercial airline pilots were black women. But she was here now, and she belonged. The crew lounge door swung open as she approached, releasing the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Inside, pilots and flight attendants huddled around tables, scrolling through flight plans, murmuring about weather conditions, or simply killing time before their assignments. As Maya made her way toward the coffee station, she felt it, the momentary pause in conversations, the subtle shift in attention. She was used to it, the quiet curiosity, the unspoken question behind certain glances. "She's the new captain?" Maya ignored it, focusing instead on pouring her coffee. Just as she stirred in a splash of cream, a deep voice called from behind her. "You must be Captain Daniels." She turned to find a man in his 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with neatly trimmed salt and pepper hair. His uniform bore the same 4 gold stripes as hers. "Captain Richard Whitmore," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Welcome to Meridian." Maya shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, sir. It's an honor to join the team." "Richard," he corrected, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'll be your check captain for the next few weeks. I assume you've reviewed today's flight path?" "Yes, sir," Maya replied. "I've memorized Meridian's SFO approach procedures and studied the weather patterns. We're expecting some turbulence over the Rockies, but nothing unusual for this time of year." Richard nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good. The crew is waiting in briefing room C. I'll meet you there in 5. He walked away without another word. Maya exhaled slowly. She had learned to read people quickly, a skill that kept her alive in the cockpit and in a male-dominated industry where proving herself never ended. And Richard Whitmore? He set off warning bells. Not outright hostility, not yet. But something about him felt like a test. She tightened her grip on her coffee cup. She wasn't here to prove a point. She was here to fly. Whatever test this was, she would pass it. The briefing that wasn't the briefing room was buzzing with quiet conversation when Maya entered. 6 flight attendants and her co-pilot, First Officer James Chen, were already seated around the table. James, a young Asian-American pilot with just under 5 years of commercial experience, stood as she entered. "Captain Daniels," he said with a warm smile, "I've heard great things. Looking forward to flying with you." Maya appreciated the sincerity in his tone. "Likewise, James." Before she could say more, the door swung open again. 2 men entered, Thomas Barrett, the Executive Operations Director, and Richard Whitmore. The air in the room seemed to shift. Barrett was tall, lean, and wore a perpetual frown, as if the weight of the entire airline industry sat on his shoulders. He cleared his throat. "There's been a change of plans." The room fell silent. Barrett deliberately avoided Maya's gaze. "Captain Whitmore will be taking command of Flight 207 today." Maya's stomach twisted. "Captain Daniels, we need you to wait outside while we reassign you." The words struck like a blow. For a split second, she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. "Wait outside?" Maya kept her posture rigid, forcing her voice to remain steady. "May I ask why?" "I was scheduled for this flight weeks ago." Barrett glanced at Richard before responding. "It's a matter of experience. San Francisco's a challenging approach, and given your unfamiliarity with our protocols..." Maya cut him off before she could stop herself. With all due respect, I've flown into SFO 73 times over the past decade, including in severe weather conditions. My qualifications were thoroughly reviewed during the hiring process. A muscle in Barrett's jaw twitched. Captain Daniels, this isn't up for discussion. Please wait outside. She could argue. She could demand a formal explanation. But Maya knew this wasn't the hill to die on. Not yet, anyway. Keeping her head high, she set down her flight documents and walked out. The hallway outside the briefing room felt colder than before. She leaned against the wall, pulse hammering. In 20 years of flying, she had faced discrimination in countless forms. Passengers asking for a real pilot upon seeing her, colleagues making offhanded comments about affirmative action. But this felt different, more deliberate. 10 minutes passed before the door opened again. James emerged looking uncomfortable. He hesitated before speaking, keeping his voice low. I'm sorry, Captain. This is bullshit. Maya gave him a sharp look. What did they say after I left? James glanced down the hallway, as if making sure no one was listening. They claimed it was standard procedure for new captains. He hesitated, then added, but I've been here 3 years. I've seen 4 new captains start. None of them got pulled from their first flight. A familiar heaviness settled in Maya's chest. There's more, James said, leaning in. I've been reassigned as Whitmore's co-pilot, but they want you to shadow a short-haul flight to Seattle instead. Maya's hands clenched into fists. And who's captaining that flight? James hesitated before answering. Harold Wilson. The name hit her like a gut punch. Harold Wilson, Meridian's most senior captain, a man with a reputation for opposing diversity in the pilot ranks. Maya had never met him, but she knew the stories. This wasn't about experience. It wasn't about protocol. It was a test, a hazing, a message. James lowered his voice. If you want to file a complaint, I'll back you up. Maya considered it. A complaint on her first day, it would brand her as difficult, a troublemaker. She'd spent her entire career navigating these waters, knowing when to fight and when to wait. Maya exhaled, eyes burning with quiet determination. Let me handle Wilson first. But in that moment, one thing became clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The jet bridge leading to Flight 422 to Seattle felt like a walk to execution. Captain Harold Wilson, Meridian Airline's most senior captain, was already in the cockpit when Maya arrived. He didn't look up from the pre-flight checklist, his thinning gray hair barely moving as he muttered to himself. The first officer, Peter Lawson, a nervous-looking man in his late 30s, offered her a quick, apologetic glance. Wilson barely acknowledged her. Jump seats open. Not a greeting, not an introduction, just a cold command. Maya slid into the jump seat, strapping in, as Wilson continued his pre-flight checks. For a moment, she just observed. She had to admit, the man knew how to fly. His movements were methodical. Every switch, every dial, every radio frequency entry was done with the precision of someone who had spent decades in the cockpit. But he wasn't talking to her. Not like a mentor guiding a new captain. Not even like a superior addressing a subordinate. Like she didn't exist. Fine. She could play that game. Maya remained silent, watching as the Boeing 737 pushed back from the gate. The flight to Seattle was a quick one, under 2 hours, but she knew it would be the longest 2 hours of her life. The silence in the cockpit was suffocating. 30 minutes into the flight, she spotted a mistake. Wilson had entered the wrong frequency for approach control, a minor but noticeable error. Peter Lawson didn't correct him. Maya hesitated. This was a test. If she said nothing, she would be complicit. If she spoke up, she would be seen as challenging authority. Screw that. Maya leaned forward, keeping her voice even. Captain, I believe Seattle approach is on 28.35 today, not 124.75. For the first time since takeoff, Wilson's shoulders tensed. The cockpit fell silent. He checked the approach chart. His lips thinned. That's correct. He adjusted the radio frequency. Then something surprising happened. Good eye, Captain Daniels, Wilson muttered, still not looking at her. Most wouldn't have caught that. For a split second, Maya thought this might be a turning point, a sliver of acknowledgement. Then Wilson turned, his pale blue eyes cold. Don't misunderstand, he said flatly. One good catch doesn't make you Meridian material. Maya felt a cold anger seize within her. With respect, Captain, she replied calmly. Traditions evolve. They have to. Wilson finally faced her fully. Not at Meridian, they don't. Maya sat back, staring out the cockpit window as they descended towards Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. She could feel it now. This wasn't just resistance. It wasn't just skepticism. They were setting her up to fail. The setup after they landed, Maya was informed that she would continue shadowing different captains for the rest of the week, not flying, not taking control of the aircraft, just sitting in the jump seat, watching, waiting, enduring thinly veiled insults and condescending explanations. Wilson, Whitmore, two more captains just like them. All men, all seasoned pilots, all determined to keep her grounded. It wasn't training. It wasn't about safety. It was hazing. Whispers in the shadows. That evening, Maya sat in her newly rented Chicago apartment, a glass of red wine in hand, as she video called her younger sister Zoe. They did what? Zoe's lawyer instincts kicked in immediately, her face filling the screen with outrage. Maya sighed. They're making it clear they don't want me there, pulling me from flights, assigning me to captains with reputations for pushing people out. It's all deliberate. Zoe leaned forward. That's textbook discrimination, Maya. You could sue them into oblivion. Maya swirled her wine, considering. And then what? Then you expose them. And I'll be labeled the black woman who sued her way into the cockpit. I'll never have the crew's trust. Zoe's frustration was palpable. So what? You're just going to take it? Maya's jaw tightened. I didn't say that. Zoe narrowed her eyes. Then what's your plan? Maya took a slow sip before answering. I need to understand what I'm dealing with. This isn't just a few bad apples. It's systemic. I need to know if it stops with Whitmore and Wilson, or if it goes all the way up. Her sister exhaled, shaking her head. Be careful, sis. These corporate types protect their own. Maya smiled, but there was steel in her voice. I know, but I didn't come this far to be pushed out before I even get started. Cracks in the foundation. Unable to sleep, Maya opened her laptop and started digging. She pulled up everything she could find about Meridian Airlines. Founded in 1967, grew from a regional carrier to a national airline, a leadership team that was overwhelmingly white and male. 3 discrimination lawsuits in the past decade, all settled out of court. Then she found something interesting, a news article from 8 months ago. FAA scrutinizes Meridian Airlines over maintenance logs. It was short, barely making headlines. The Federal Aviation Administration had flagged minor discrepancies in Meridian's maintenance records. But Maya knew how these things worked. Minor discrepancies weren't always minor. Minor discrepancies could mean cut corners, could mean deliberate cover-ups, could mean people's lives were at risk. She bookmarked the article, her mind racing. Something wasn't right at Meridian Airlines, and she was going to find out exactly what it was. Maya arrived at O'Hare International Airport the next morning with a new mission. She wasn't just here to endure another humiliating day of being sidelined. She was here to observe, listen, and dig deeper. Her gut told her that Meridian Airlines' problems ran deeper than discrimination. The FAA investigation from 8 months ago, the settled lawsuits, the whispers about cut corners. She needed proof, and she was going to find it from the inside. Warnings from a friend. That morning, she was assigned to shadow Captain Andrew Peterson on a flight to Denver. Unlike Wilson and Whitmore, Peterson was cordial, if a bit reserved. Midway through the flight, after they reached cruising altitude, he surprised her by speaking up. For what it's worth, Peterson said quietly, keeping his hands steady on the yoke, not all of us agree with how you're being treated. Maya studied him carefully. But you're not speaking up either. Peterson winced. It's complicated. There was that word again. Complicated. A word used to justify inaction. A word used by people who saw injustice but chose to look away. Maya folded her arms. Seems like tradition covers a multitude of sins here at Meridian. Peterson hesitated, lowering his voice even more. Look, just be careful around Barrett and Wilson. They've been friends for 30 years. Barrett protects Wilson and his circle, no matter what. Maya's stomach tightened. No matter what? A flicker of unease crossed Peterson's face. I didn't say that. Maya leaned in. You didn't have to. Peterson's posture stiffened. He faced forward again, hands tightening around the controls. I've said too much already. Just keep your eyes open. A visit to the shadows between flights, Maya made a point of visiting the maintenance hangar. Officially, she was there to learn Meridian's procedures. Unofficially, she was looking for cracks in the foundation. Most of the ground crew were polite but distant. But one man, Marcus Jefferson, a middle-aged black technician, warmed up to her when they realized they had both grown up in Detroit. As he inspected an engine cowling, Marcus spoke in low tones. I've been here 23 years, keeping these birds in the air, he said. Seen a lot of changes. Not all good. Maya casually leaned against the railing. How so? Marcus glanced around before answering. New management's been pushing us to speed things up. More flights, less turnaround time. Some checks that used to be mandatory, now at technician discretion. Maya felt a chill. Is that legal? Marcus gave her a grimace. Gray area. They've got fancy lawyers who know how to word things so it sounds kosher. But between us, he lowered his voice, I wouldn't put my family on some of these planes. Maya's heart pounded. Before she could press further, a supervisor appeared, eyeing them suspiciously. Marcus quickly returned to his work, and Maya thanked him before walking away. But she knew she had just stumbled onto something big. The pattern emerges. For the next 2 weeks, Maya endured the humiliation of being treated like a rookie despite her years of experience. She was assigned to the least desirable routes, given minimal rest between flights, subjected to excessive scrutiny of her performance. The message was clear. They wanted her to quit, but instead of breaking, she started collecting evidence. She kept mental notes of every slight, every deviation from protocol, every whisper about unsafe practices. She also built alliances. James Chen, her co-pilot, continued to express his support. Lauren Kim, a flight attendant, confided in her about the company's culture. Marcus, the mechanic, gradually shared more details about maintenance shortcuts. Maya was careful in these conversations. She never explicitly stated her suspicions. She never revealed her intentions. But she made it clear, truth and safety mattered more than silence. The breaking point. 3 weeks in, Maya was finally assigned to captain a flight, a red-eye from Chicago to Las Vegas, one of the most unpopular routes. She suspected it was a setup. They were giving her a flight that had difficult, rowdy passengers, would leave her exhausted, had tight turnaround schedules. James was assigned as her first officer, which told her everything. They wanted her to fail, but they hadn't counted on one thing. She was paying attention. A dangerous oversight. During the pre-flight inspection, Maya noticed something off in the maintenance log. The dates of routine checks didn't match up. She frowned, flipping through the records. James, these logs don't make sense. James glanced over. You sure? Maya nodded. Something doesn't add up. She called for a thorough inspection, delaying the flight by 20 minutes. A cardinal sin in an industry obsessed with on-time departures. Are you sure that's necessary, Captain? James asked, his voice hesitant. The dispatch team was already asking about the delay. Maya remained firm. Better 20 minutes late than not arriving at all. She went through the aircraft systems herself, checking, verifying, confirming. Only after she was fully satisfied did she clear the aircraft for departure. The flight went smoothly, but upon returning to Chicago, she was summoned to Thomas Barrett's office. The showdown Barrett's office was Spartan, designed to intimidate. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Captain Daniels, I understand you delayed Flight 889 last night with an unnecessary inspection. Maya sat up straight. The maintenance logs showed inconsistencies that warranted further examination. Barrett's expression darkened. Our ground crew cleared that aircraft, and I overruled them based on FAA regulations that require complete and accurate documentation before flight. Barrett's jaw tightened. At Meridian, we value efficiency alongside safety. Delays cost this company thousands of dollars. Maya held his gaze. Are you suggesting I overlooked discrepancies in maintenance logs? Barrett leaned forward. I'm suggesting you use better judgment in the future. Maya smiled coldly. Safety is my primary judgment call, always. She stood. This fight had just escalated. Barrett wouldn't forget the challenge, and neither would she. A line in the sand. That night, Maya spread out all the evidence she had been collecting. Marcus's warnings, Lauren's photos, her own notes. It was worse than she imagined. Meridian Airlines was falsifying maintenance reports, pressuring employees to overlook safety issues, retaliating against anyone who spoke up. She picked up her phone and dialed the one number she had been avoiding. Zoe answered immediately. It's me, Maya said. I need your help. A pause. You're sure about this? Maya looked at the evidence spread before her. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Maya Daniels had always known that the truth had weight, but as she sat alone in her apartment, staring at the evidence spread across her coffee table, she realized that this truth, the one she had uncovered at Meridian Airlines, was heavy enough to bring an entire company crashing down. She had spent weeks documenting what she saw. Falsified maintenance logs, unsafe aircraft being cleared for flight retaliation against employees who spoke up, and now she had enough proof to take the next step. She picked up her phone and called Zoe. Her younger sister's voice was sharp and alert despite the late hour. I'm listening. Maya took a deep breath. I need you to connect me with your contact at the FAA. There was a pause, then Zoe spoke carefully. You're really doing this? Maya looked down at the USB drive Marcus had given her, filled with damning internal memos and maintenance records. I don't have a choice. An enemy's next move. The next morning, Maya walked into Meridian's headquarters like nothing had changed, but she felt the shift immediately. Eyes followed her as she moved through the halls. Conversations died when she entered the crew lounge. Someone had talked, and now they were watching her. She had just settled at a computer terminal in the operations center, pretending to review flight schedules, when her phone vibrated. A message from James Chen. James, this is wrong. Let me know how I can help. Before she could reply, another text popped up. Marcus, need to talk. Maintenance Bay 34, 4:30, important. Maya felt a prickle of unease. Marcus had already given her enough evidence to bury Meridian. What else had he found? The technician's warning. At 4:30 sharp, Maya took a detour on her way out of the terminal, slipping into the maintenance hangar where Marcus worked. Her ID badge no longer gave her access, but Marcus was waiting near a side entrance, shifting nervously from foot to foot. I shouldn't be doing this, he muttered as he let her in. Then why are you? Marcus hesitated, then exhaled sharply. Because I've got a conscience. He led her behind a parked Boeing 737 away from prying eyes. They're falsifying records, he said without preamble. Not just tweaking dates, outright fabricating them. Maya's stomach dropped. How bad? Marcus's eyes darkened. At least 30% of our fleet has maintenance issues that should ground them. Instead, they're getting rubber stamped and sent back in the air. Maya gritted her teeth. That's criminal. Marcus nodded grimly. And if someone refuses to sign off, they disappear. Maya frowned. Disappear? Marcus lowered his voice. Transferred. Fired for unrelated reasons. Or worse, accidents. A cold dread coiled in Maya's chest. Like Paul Decker, she murmured. Marcus flinched. You heard about that? Paul Decker, one of Meridian's top mechanics, had suffered a mysterious fall from a maintenance platform a year ago, leaving him permanently disabled. The company had called it employee negligence, but now Maya wasn't so sure. Marcus pressed a USB drive into her palm. Flight logs, maintenance reports, emails from upper management, he said. I've been collecting them for months, just in case. Maya clenched the drive in her fist. This could shut them down. Marcus exhaled. That's the idea. He hesitated, then added in a strained voice. Just be careful. You're poking a bear. Maya met his eyes. The bear should be afraid of me. Grounded before she could take off. The next morning, Maya walked into Meridian's operations center to find a new message on her schedule. Flight assignment. None. Report to HR. She already knew what was coming. Security escorted her to the executive conference room. Inside, she found Thomas Barrett, Richard Whitmore, Harold Wilson, and two corporate lawyers waiting for her. Barrett leaned forward, hands clasped. Captain Daniels, it has come to our attention that you've been accessing restricted areas and soliciting information from employees beyond your clearance level. Maya remained silent. Furthermore, Barrett continued, you've been collecting internal documents and communicating with outside entities about company matters, which is a direct violation of your confidentiality agreement. Still, Maya said nothing. Barrett's jaw tightened. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Maya tilted her head. Am I being fired? One of the lawyers spoke smoothly. We are offering you the opportunity to resign with a generous severance package, provided you sign an NDA. Maya let the silence stretch. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. She placed it on the table. Before I respond, you should know that at 9 a.m. this morning, my attorney submitted a report to the FAA. The room froze. Maya continued, her voice steady. It details systemic safety violations at Meridian Airlines, falsified maintenance records, planes flying with known defects, testimonies from multiple employees about pressure to ignore safety concerns. Barrett went pale. The lawyers exchanged panicked glances. You're bluffing, Barrett snapped. Maya smiled coldly. A second copy was sent to the Chicago Tribune at noon, along with evidence of retaliatory practices against employees who raised concerns. Wilson slammed his fist on the table. This is blackmail. No, Captain Wilson, Maya corrected him. This is accountability. The second lawyer leaned over to whisper urgently in Barrett's ear. After a tense moment, Barrett exhaled heavily. What do you want? Maya met his gaze, unflinching. I want every aircraft with maintenance discrepancies grounded immediately. I want a full safety audit conducted by an independent third party. And I want written assurance that no employee who cooperated with my investigation will face retaliation. Wilson scoffed. That would bankrupt the company. Maya raised an eyebrow. As opposed to what happens when the FAA revokes your operating certificate, or when families of passengers learn you knowingly flew unsafe aircraft. Barrett rubbed his temples. After a long moment, he let out a slow breath. We need time. You have 1 hour, Maya cut in. After that, I call my contacts and tell them to proceed with full public disclosure. The room remained deathly silent as the weight of her words settled. The storm had arrived, and Maya Daniels had just grounded an airline. The next 60 minutes felt like a lifetime. Maya sat outside the executive conference room, her hands clasped on her lap, her expression unreadable. Inside, Thomas Barrett, Richard Whitmore, Harold Wilson, and Meridian's legal team were scrambling, whispering, debating, panicking. She had set the clock ticking, and they knew it. With every passing second, their control unraveled. Maya glanced at her phone. 50 minutes left. A message popped up from Zoe. Zoe, FAA is reviewing the report now. Their team is mobilizing. A second message came in from the Chicago Tribune. Tribune editor. We're finalizing the story. If Meridian issues a response, let us know. Maya smirked slightly. There would be a response, whether Meridian wanted to or not. She looked at the frosted glass doors of the conference room, where shadows moved frantically. 40 minutes left. A system in free fall. At minute 37, the door swung open. A furious-looking lawyer emerged, giving her a tight-lipped stare before storming down the hallway. A minute later, Barrett himself stepped out, his face flushed. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he exhaled sharply, as if trying to swallow his own pride. Fine, he muttered. You win. Maya leaned back slightly. Define win. Barrett's jaw tightened. We'll ground the planes for an independent review. The FAA will be allowed full access to our records. Employees who cooperated with you will not face retaliation. She studied him. Put it in writing. We are, his voice was clipped. Legal is finalizing the documentation now. A long pause. Then his eyes narrowed. You understand what you've done, don't you? Maya tilted her head. Yes, I stopped a disaster before it happened. Barrett's lip curled slightly, a mixture of resentment and resignation. You didn't just take down Meridian Airlines, Captain Daniels. You destroyed careers, millions in investments, a company that's been around for half a century. Maya didn't flinch. No, Mr. Barrett, you did that. He stiffened. She leaned in, lowering her voice. When you chose profit over safety, when you silenced employees who raised concerns, when you let planes take off with defects you knew existed, you killed this company. Not me. Barrett said nothing. For the first time, Maya saw uncertainty in his expression. He knew she was right. With a final glare, he turned and walked back into the conference room, slamming the door behind him. The collapse begins. By that evening, Meridian Airlines made an official announcement. A full audit of its maintenance operations would commence immediately. All flights involving flagged aircraft were grounded. The FAA had launched an expanded investigation. The fallout was immediate. Passengers were stranded, demanding answers. Investors pulled out, sending the company's stock into freefall. The media descended like vultures, unearthing years of hidden safety violations. Maya watched it all unfold from a distance, her phone buzzing nonstop. One message caught her eye, from Marcus Jefferson. Marcus, you actually did it. Respect. She smiled. But the fight wasn't over yet. The dominoes fall over the next 6 weeks. The unraveling continued. Meridian's stock plummeted. Barrett, Whitmore, and Wilson were placed on leave, pending investigations. More employees came forward, exposing years of ignored warnings and cover-ups. Then the Justice Department stepped in. One morning, Zoe called, barely containing her excitement. Maya, are you watching the news? Maya clicked on the live broadcast. A press conference was underway. The U.S. Attorney General stood at the podium, flanked by FAA officials and federal prosecutors. We are announcing criminal charges against several executives of Meridian Airlines, including Thomas Barrett, Richard Whitmore, and Harold Wilson, the official declared. The charges include reckless endangerment, fraud, and obstruction of justice. Maya exhaled slowly, gripping her phone. She had expected corporate penalties, fines, lawsuits. But criminal charges? She hadn't dared to hope for actual justice. They're going to prison, Zoe murmured. You did this. Maya shook her head. We did this. A new flight plan. A month later, Meridian Airlines was officially dead. Atlantic Airways, a rival carrier, purchased its remaining assets, offering jobs to employees, except for the executives under investigation. Maya was sitting in a small cafe across from Meridian's former headquarters, watching as workers removed the company's logo from the building. James Chen slid into the seat across from her. It's official, he said, looking both exhausted and amazed. Atlantic's taking over. They're offering senior positions to pilots who passed certification. Maya arched an eyebrow. And you? James grinned. Senior first officer, she smirked. Good for you. He studied her for a moment. What about you? You've got offers from 3 airlines, consulting gigs, and a book deal. What's next? Maya glanced at her coffee. Truthfully, she wasn't sure. Then another message popped up on her phone. FAA Director. We'd like to discuss a position on our Aviation Safety Oversight Committee. She stared at the words, processing. James watched her expression shift. What? Maya exhaled, setting her phone down. The FAA wants me on their oversight board. James blinked. You mean you'd be in charge of making sure this never happens again? She nodded slowly. James whistled. Damn, that's bigger than just flying planes, Maya. She thought about it. For years, she had fought for a seat in the cockpit, only to realize that sometimes real change happens outside of it. She wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was a protector of the skies. Maya smiled. I think I'll take it. Epilogue. The sky belongs to everyone. 3 months later, Maya Daniels sat in the captain's seat of a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, guiding Atlantic Airways Flight 207 to San Francisco through the morning sky. Her 4 gold stripes caught the sunlight. Beside her, First Officer Tasha Williams, a young black woman, monitored the instruments with focused precision. Maya glanced over, a slight smile playing on her lips. Beautiful day for flying, Tasha nodded. Perfect. Then after a pause, she added softly, Captain, what you did at Meridian, it's why I never gave up on aviation. Maya's heart tightened. She thought about her own journey, every barrier she had broken, every door that had been slammed in her face, every fight she had chosen to win. She smiled, looking at the horizon ahead. The sky belongs to all of us, First Officer Williams. Never forget that. As the aircraft soared above the clouds, Maya Daniels felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not just victory, not just justice, freedom, and this time no one was going to tell her to wait outside. The end. Benja Noy. Write Chapter 6, ChatGPT John Noy. Chapter 6, The Ripple Effect. The fall of Meridian Airlines sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. For weeks, major news outlets dissected every aspect of the scandal. Headlines screamed about falsified safety records, corporate greed, and whistleblower retaliation. Industry experts debated how one woman's refusal to stay silent had unraveled a company that had stood for over half a century. Maya Daniels became a symbol. She had never wanted to be. She just wanted to fly. But now she was something more, and that meant she had a responsibility. An unexpected message. One evening, as Maya sat in her new apartment, her phone buzzed with an unexpected email notification. The sender's name made her pause. Richard Whitmore. The same Richard Whitmore who had tried to keep her out of the cockpit. The same man who had sided with Meridian's corruption until the very end. She hesitated before opening the email. Subject: An apology. Captain Daniels. You may be surprised to hear from me, and truthfully, I wasn't sure I should reach out. But I've had a lot of time to reflect since my forced retirement and my community service sentence. I won't try to justify what I did. I won't pretend I wasn't complicit in a system designed to keep people like you out, even when you were more than qualified to be there. I spent years telling myself that I was just following tradition, that Meridian had high standards, that we weren't ready for change. But you proved me wrong, and for what it's worth, I'm sorry. The aviation world is better because you refused to be silenced. Richard Whitmore. Maya stared at the screen for a long time. She wasn't sure how to feel. A part of her wanted to dismiss the apology as too little, too late. But another part of her, the part that believed in growth, in redemption, in change, understood what this email really meant. Even those who fought the hardest to maintain the status quo could be forced to confront their own failures. After a moment, she typed a simple response. Richard, apology accepted. The sky belongs to all of us. Captain Maya Daniels. She hit send and leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. It wasn't just about forgiving Richard Whitmore. It was about moving forward. A seat at the table 3 months later, Maya sat at the FAA's Aviation Safety Oversight Committee headquarters, watching as industry executives, government officials, and aviation experts filled the room. She had accepted the FAA's offer to join the committee, not because she wanted to sit in meetings all day, but because she knew she couldn't just walk away. This was her chance to make sure another Meridian never happened again. A woman in a dark suit approached and extended a hand. Captain Daniels, we've heard a lot about you. Maya shook her hand firmly. I hope some of it was good. The woman smiled. More than you think. As Maya took her seat at the long conference table, she realized something. She had spent her entire career fighting for a place in the cockpit. Now she was fighting for something even bigger. She wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was a guardian of the skies, and this time, no one was going to shut her out. Maya had spent her entire life looking up at the sky, but now the sky was looking back. Her name had become synonymous with aviation reform. She was no longer just Captain Maya Daniels, the pilot who took down Meridian Airlines. She was now a force in the industry, a voice for those who had been ignored for far too long. And that meant every move she made was being watched, by supporters, by skeptics, by those still waiting for her to fail, and by those who wanted her gone. The warning. It was a Tuesday morning when Maya received the first sign that not everyone wanted change. She was reviewing aviation safety protocols at the FAA's Oversight Committee office when her assistant knocked on the door. Captain Daniels, there's a package for you. Maya frowned. I wasn't expecting anything. Her assistant hesitated. No return address. Maya's instincts kicked in immediately. Captain Daniels, there's a package for you. Maya frowned. I wasn't expecting anything. Her assistant hesitated. No return address. Maya's instincts kicked in immediately. She stood and walked cautiously to the reception desk, where a small brown box sat waiting. She picked it up, noting the weight, just light enough to be suspicious. She turned to security. "Scan this." They ran it through an X-ray machine. The results? Nothing dangerous, just a single object inside. Still, Maya opened it carefully, peeling back the layers of brown paper until she found what was inside. A printed photograph. Her stomach dropped as she stared at it. It was her, walking into her apartment building 2 nights ago. Someone had been watching her, and they wanted her to know it. The ghost of Meridian Maya's grip on the photograph tightened. She had known that exposing the truth about Meridian Airlines would make enemies. But this was something else. She had already won. The airline was gone. The executives were facing criminal charges. The industry was scrambling to fix its broken safety standards. So why did it feel like the fight wasn't over? Her phone vibrated, a message from Zoe. "Zoe, just heard from my contact at DOJ. The criminal cases against Barrett, Whitmore, and Wilson are moving forward, but someone's trying to delay the hearings." Maya's pulse quickened. "Delay," she typed back quickly. Maya. "Who?" "Zoe. Someone powerful." Maya exhaled slowly, glancing back at the photo in her hand. She was being watched, and now someone was trying to stall justice, which meant only one thing. There was still more to uncover. Digging deeper, Maya wasn't afraid of being watched, but she was tired of playing defense. So she decided to go on the offensive. That night, she called Marcus Jefferson, the maintenance technician who had risked his career to expose Meridian's safety failures. When he picked up, his voice was tense. "Maya, you sure you should be calling me?" Maya smirked. "If I worried about what I should and shouldn't do, Meridian would still be flying unsafe planes." Marcus sighed. "Yeah, fair." Maya leaned forward. "Tell me the truth. Were Barrett and the others the only ones involved?" A long silence. Then Marcus muttered something under his breath. "I was afraid you'd ask that." Maya's stomach tightened. "Marcus." "Barrett wasn't the top of the chain," Marcus admitted. "Meridian had bigger players backing them. People who saw the airline as a money machine. And those people? They aren't happy that you shut it down." Maya closed her eyes. Of course, Meridian had been a multi-billion-dollar operation. There was no way a few executives were the only ones guilty. There had to be investors, politicians, other industry leaders who had turned a blind eye to the corruption because it had been profitable. And now, they wanted to bury the rest of the evidence before the truth spread any further. Maya opened her laptop. If they thought they could scare her into silence, they were dead wrong. It was time to start digging deeper. Maya Daniels had spent her entire career defying expectations. She had fought for her place in the cockpit, only to realize that the real battle wasn't just about flying, it was about making sure the sky was safe for everyone. Now, standing on the edge of yet another fight, she understood something even more profound. The truth never falls. People could cover it up. They could delay it. They could threaten those who spoke it. But eventually it would rise. Unstoppable, undeniable, unshakable. The final move, Maya didn't wait for the powerful men in the shadows to come after her. She went after them first. Over the next few weeks, she worked with Zoe and a team of investigators to uncover the deeper corruption behind Meridian Airlines. What they found was even worse than she imagined. Government contracts that had been fraudulently obtained. Inspections that were intentionally skipped to meet investor deadlines. A web of executives, politicians, and financiers who had quietly benefited from Meridian's reckless practices. Maya didn't just hand over the evidence. She made sure it was seen. She coordinated with journalists, government agencies, and industry watchdogs, ensuring that when the story broke, no one could stop it. And when the final report was released, the headlines were brutal. Meridian Airlines scandal expands. Criminal investigations reach government and private investors. Aviation industry faces reckoning after largest safety cover-up in U.S. history. The woman who grounded an airline. Maya Daniels fight for the truth. One by one, the men who had profited from Meridian's lies were brought down. Some were arrested, some were fined millions, some simply disappeared from public life, their reputations permanently destroyed. And Maya, she kept flying. The lesson that took a lifetime to learn. 6 months after the final collapse of Meridian, Maya stood before a room filled with young pilots, engineers, and aviation students at an FAA conference. She had been invited to speak, not just as a pilot, but as a leader who had changed the industry. As she looked out at the crowd, she saw so many faces that had never been given a chance before. Men, women, people of color, people who had been told they weren't good enough, weren't experienced enough, weren't what the industry was used to. She took a deep breath and spoke. In aviation, there's no room for lies, because when you lie at 35,000 feet, people die. The room was silent. The sky doesn't care what you look like. It doesn't care where you come from. It only cares about whether you know what you're doing and whether you have the courage to make the right call when no one else will. She let that sink in before continuing. The hardest part of change isn't proving what's wrong. It's convincing people that we can do better. She saw heads nodding. Some understood the fight she had endured. Some would endure it themselves in the years to come. She finished with the words that had defined her journey. Never wait outside. Never let anyone tell you that you don't belong. And never, never stay silent when you see something wrong. A standing ovation erupted, not because she had brought down an airline, but because she had built something better in its place. The sky is open. That night, Maya piloted a red-eye flight from New York to Los Angeles. At 35,000 feet, she looked out into the endless darkness, broken only by the twinkling lights below. She thought of everyone who had tried to stop her, everyone who had said she wouldn't make it, everyone who had told her to wait outside. They were gone now, and she was still flying. She glanced at her first officer, a young woman fresh out of training. Maya smiled. Your turn to take the controls. The woman nodded, adjusting her grip on the yoke. As the plane soared forward, Maya leaned back, watching the sky stretch before them. The sky had never belonged to the people who tried to keep others out. It had always belonged to those who dared to fly. And Maya Daniels had never stopped flying. Not then. Not now. Not ever.